The worn leather boots sat on the bench by the door, oiled and clean despite the mud that caked everything else in the boot room, and Yoren Oakes heard his 7-year-old son's voice cut through the evening quiet like a knife through wool. "Why does the orc woman keep Dad's boots?" Yoren stopped in the doorway, his hand still on the frame, watching his son Tobias crouch by the bench with one small finger tracing the careful stitching where Ravka had mended a split seam. The boy's question hung in the cold air between the kitchen's warmth and the coming night's frost, and something in Yoren's chest tightened like a fist. Ravka stood at the kitchen table behind them, her green hands buried in bread dough, and Yoren saw her shoulders go rigid. She did not turn. She did not speak. The silence stretched until Tobias looked up at his father with those wide brown eyes that still held his dead mother's softness, waiting for an answer Yoren did not have. "Go wash up for supper," Yoren said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Cold's getting in." Tobias scrambled up and darted past him toward the wash basin, and Yoren forced himself to step fully into the boot room and pull the door shut against the autumn wind. He looked at the boots on the bench. They were 3 years old, the leather darkened by lanolin, and the soles worn thin at the heel where he walked uneven on the hillsides. He had 2 newer pairs. These should have been relegated to the scrap pile or given to someone who needed them. Instead, they sat on that bench every night, clean and oiled, waiting. Yoren picked one up and turned it over in his calloused hands. The stitching was neat and tight where Ravka had repaired it. The leather was supple where she had worked oil into it week after week. He set it down carefully and walked into the kitchen where the warmth from the hearth wrapped around him like an unwanted embrace. Ravka still had her back to him, her broad shoulders moving as she kneaded the dough with methodical precision. She wore a plain wool dress the color of oatmeal, her black braid hanging thick down her spine, and she did not acknowledge him even though he knew she had heard every word. Her pointed ears twitched slightly, the only sign she was aware of his presence. "Supper will be ready soon," she said, her voice low and careful. "The stew needs another quarter hour." Yoren grunted and moved to the table where Tobias was already scrubbing his hands and face with more enthusiasm than accuracy. He helped his son dry off, then sent him to set the table while he stood there feeling useless in his own kitchen. This was how the past year had been. Ravka had come to the farm in the spring after his wife, Sarah's death the winter before, answering a notice he had posted in the village for household help. She had walked up the long path to his door with nothing but a canvas pack on her back and Winter still clinging to the high pastures, and she had looked at him with eyes the color of dark amber, and said she could cook and clean and knew her way around livestock if he needed an extra hand in the fields. He had hired her because he was drowning, because Tobias was 6 years old and grieving and Yoren could not keep the house and the sheep and his son all at once, because the village women who had helped in the immediate aftermath of Sarah's death had their own families and he could not keep asking. Because he was desperate. She had never asked for more than room and board and a small wage. She slept in the narrow room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry. She worked from before dawn until after dark. She never complained. She never pushed. She moved through the house like a ghost, efficient and silent, and Tobias had stopped crying himself to sleep within a month of her arrival. Yoren had told himself it was just help. Just someone to keep the household running while he kept the farm alive. Nothing more. But now, his son was asking about boots, and Yoren did not know how to answer because he did not know what the answer meant. Supper was mutton stew with carrots and turnips, thick slices of the bread Ravka had been kneading, butter that she had churned that morning from the milk of the 2 cows they kept. Tobias chattered about the lamb he had been bottle feeding, the one whose mother had rejected it, and how it followed him around the yard like a dog. Ravka listened with a small smile that showed the tips of her lower tusks, and she refilled Tobias's bowl without being asked when he scraped it clean. Yoren ate in silence and watched them. Watched his son lean against Ravka's arm when she reached across to pour more milk. Watched her steady hand ruffle the boy's dark hair with an affection that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. Watched the way the lamplight caught the strong planes of her face and made her green skin look like aged bronze. After supper, Tobias went to bed without argument, tired from a day spent running across the hillsides. Ravka cleaned the kitchen while Yoren sat by the hearth and pretended to read the farming journal he had borrowed from his neighbor. The pages might as well have been blank. He could not stop thinking about those boots. When Ravka finally finished and moved toward the door to her small room, Yoren spoke without looking up from the journal. "Why do you keep them?" She stopped. He heard the pause in her footsteps, the catch in her breathing. When she did not answer, he finally looked up and found her standing with her back to him, one hand on the doorframe as if she needed it for support. "Keep what?" Her voice was steady but too quiet. "The boots. My old boots. Why do you clean them?" The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. Then Ravka turned, and her amber eyes met his across the small kitchen, and something in her expression made his heart beat harder against his ribs. "They are good boots," she said. "They should not be wasted." It was a reasonable answer. A practical answer. Yoren did not believe it for a moment. "I have better boots," he said. "Yes." "So why keep those?" Ravka's jaw tightened, her tusks pressing slightly against her lower lip. "Because they are yours." The words fell between them like stones into still water, and Yoren felt the ripples spread through his chest. He should have left it alone. He should have nodded and let her go to her room and pretended this conversation had never happened. Instead, he set the journal aside and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "What does that mean?" "It means they are yours." Her voice was firmer now, almost defiant. "They fit your feet. They know the shape of your walk. They have been with you through seasons and work. They matter." "They are old boots, Ravka. They are your boots." She said it like that explained everything, and maybe in her mind it did, but Yoren was too tired and too confused and too aware of the way his chest felt tight whenever she looked at him like this. He wanted to push further. He wanted to understand. But Ravka's expression had closed like a door, and she gave him a short nod and disappeared into her room before he could find the words to stop her. The nights grew colder. The sheep needed to be brought down from the high pastures before the first hard frost. And Yoren spent 3 days on the hillsides with his dogs, driving the flock down to the lower fields where they could be watched more easily through the winter. Ravka kept the house running while he was gone, kept Tobias fed and warm and occupied, and when Yoren came back exhausted and smelling of lanolin and wet wool, there was hot water waiting for him to wash and a meal that filled the hollow places in his stomach. The boots were still on the bench. Still clean. Still waiting. Yoren tried to ignore them. He wore his newer boots out to the fields each morning and came back with them caked in mud, and every night they sat in the boot room dirty while the old pair gleamed. It gnawed at him, not with anger but with something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like hope, and Yoren Oakes had buried hope with his wife 2 winters ago. October gave way to November. The first frost came and killed the last of the kitchen garden. Yoren and Ravka spent a long day harvesting what could be saved and storing it in the root cellar, working side by side with Tobias running between them carrying armfuls of turnips and cabbages. Ravka's breath misted in the cold air, and her green cheeks flushed darker with exertion, and when she straightened from tying up a bundle of dried herbs, she caught Yoren watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." He looked away and hefted another sack of potatoes. "You do that often." "Do what? Watch me." She said it without accusation, just observation, and Yoren felt heat rise in his neck despite the cold. "Making sure the work is getting done," he muttered. "Is it? What? Getting done?" There was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice, and when he glanced back at her, she was almost smiling. "You know it is." "Then why watch?" Yoren did not have an answer for that, or maybe he had too many answers and none of them were things he knew how to say. He turned back to the potatoes and heard her quiet laugh, warm and low, before she returned to her herbs. That night after Tobias was asleep, Yoren sat by the hearth and watched Ravka mend one of his work shirts. Her needle moved with quick efficiency, pulling the torn seam back together with stitches so neat they were almost invisible. The firelight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the strong line of her jaw and the careful concentration in her eyes. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" he asked. She glanced up, surprised by the question. "My mother, she's still alive." "No." Ravka's attention returned to the shirt. "She died when I was 14, fever. Your father died in a border skirmish when I was 10. She bit off the thread and examined her work, then set the shirt aside and picked up another. "I have been on my own since 14, mostly." Yoren processed this. "That is young to be alone. I managed." Her needle began its work again. "You learn quickly when you have to." "No other family." "A brother. He went north years ago. I have not heard from him in a long time." She paused, then added more softly, "I assume he is alive. He was always good at surviving. Do you miss him?" "Sometimes." Ravka's hand stilled on the fabric. "But missing people does not bring them back. You learn to carry it and keep walking." Yoren understood that better than he wanted to. He stared into the fire and felt the familiar weight of Sarah's absence, the hole she had left that had never filled. He had learned to carry it. He had learned to keep walking. But some days it felt like dragging a boulder uphill, and lately he had noticed the weight felt lighter when Ravka was nearby. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "To this farm, to work for a widower with a child. You could have found easier work." Ravka did not answer immediately. Her needle kept moving in and out, steady and sure. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "I saw your notice in the village. It said you needed someone who could keep a house and did not mind hard work and isolation. That fit what I was looking for." "Which was?" "A place to be useful. A place to stay." She met his eyes across the room. "I am tired of moving from place to place. I wanted somewhere that felt like it could be permanent if I did the work right." "Is it?" The question came out before Yoren could stop it. "Does it feel permanent?" Something shifted in Ravka's expression, something vulnerable and guarded all at once. "That depends on whether you plan to keep me." "Why would I not? People change their minds." She returned to her sewing with deliberate focus. "Especially when it comes to my kind. They hire me when they are desperate, and they let me go when things get easier and they remember they do not want an orc in their house." Anger flared hot in Yoren's chest. "Someone did that to you." "Several someones." Ravka's voice was flat now, matter of fact. "The family 2 years ago kept me through harvest and let me go before winter. Said they could not afford to keep me, but they hired a human girl the next week. The one before that kept me 3 months before the wife decided she did not like the way I looked at her children. I was teaching the little one her numbers. The one before that, I am not them," Yoren interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. "I do not work that way." Ravka looked at him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for something he did not understand. "No," she said finally. "You do not." That is why I stay." The words settled over him like snow, quiet and insistent. Yoren wanted to say something more, to promise her that she had a place here as long as she wanted it, but his throat felt tight and the words would not come. He nodded instead, a short jerk of his chin, and Ravka gave him a small smile before returning to her mending. The shirt she was working on was his favorite, the one with the collar worn soft from years of use. She handled it like it mattered, like he mattered. Yoren went to bed that night and lay awake staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and thinking about boots and stitching, and the way Ravka said his name when she was trying to get his attention. She said it with the faintest hint of warmth, like the word itself was something worth caring for. Sarah had been gone for almost 2 years. He had loved her with everything he had, and her death had nearly broken him. He had not thought he would ever feel anything for anyone again. Had not wanted to. Loving someone meant losing them, and Yoren did not know if he could survive that pain a second time. But Ravka was here, and she tended his boots, and when she smiled at his son, something in Yoren's chest cracked open just enough to let light in. He did not sleep until nearly dawn. The days grew shorter, and the cold settled in with intent. Yoren spent his mornings checking the sheep and repairing fences, his afternoons splitting firewood and reinforcing the barn against the coming snow. Ravka worked beside him when she could, her strength surprising him even after months of watching her haul water and turn heavy mattresses and wrestle sacks of grain. She was not built like the broad, hulking orcs from the stories. She was tall but not towering, strong but with a lean grace that reminded him of the working dogs he kept, all efficiency and controlled power. She did not complain when her hands cracked from the cold. She did not shy away from the hard tasks. She simply worked, steady and relentless, and Yoren found himself matching his pace to hers without meaning to. One afternoon when they were reinforcing the chicken coop against foxes, Tobias came running from the house with his lamb wobbling behind him on unsteady legs. "Ravka, look. Wooly can jump now." Ravka straightened from hammering a board and wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. "Can he? Show me." Tobias set up a small stick across 2 rocks and coaxed the lamb to hop over it. The lamb managed a clumsy leap that was more stumble than jump, and Tobias whooped with pride. Ravka laughed, a sound Yoren had not heard enough of, warm and genuine. "He will be a champion jumper by spring," she said, crouching down to scratch the lamb's ears. "You think so?" Tobias leaned against her shoulder, looking up at her with complete trust. "I know so. He has a good teacher." Tobias beamed, and Yoren felt that crack in his chest widen another fraction. His son had not looked at anyone with that kind of uncomplicated affection since Sarah died. Yoren had tried to be enough for him, tried to be both mother and father, but he was not built for softness. He was built for work and endurance and keeping things alive through sheer stubbornness. Ravka was different. She had a gentleness with Tobias that never felt forced, a patience that seemed bottomless. She told him stories while she worked, taught him songs in the orcish tongue that sounded like gravel and honey mixed together. She let him help with tasks that would have been easier done alone, explaining each step with the seriousness of someone who believed the boy's questions mattered. She was raising his son alongside him, and Yoren had been so focused on surviving each day that he had not noticed until now. That night after Tobias was asleep, Yoren poured 2 cups of the apple cider Ravka had made in September and brought one to where she sat by the fire. She looked up in surprise when he held it out to her. "What is this for?" "For everything you do." He sat down across from her with his own cup. "For Tobias, for the house, for the farm, for staying." Ravka took the cup carefully, her green fingers wrapping around it like it was something precious. "You pay me. Not enough. It is what we agreed. The agreement did not include you becoming the most important person in my son's life. The words came out rough, almost harsh, but Ravka did not flinch. He is a good boy, she said quietly. He deserves someone who sees that. He has that. Yoren looked at her over the rim of his cup. He has you. Ravka's expression shifted, vulnerability flickering across her features before she hid it behind a sip of cider. I care for him. I know. He reminds me of my brother when he was small, before the world got to him. She stared into the fire. I would do anything to keep that boy safe and happy. You know that, yes, I know. And he did. He had seen it in the way she checked on Tobias at night, the way she made his favorite meals without being asked, the way she stood between him and anything that might hurt him. She loved his son, and that terrified Yoren almost as much as it comforted him. Because if she loved Tobias, and if Yoren was starting to feel something for her that went beyond gratitude or respect, then this was not just an arrangement anymore. This was not just a housekeeper and an employer. This was something else, something complicated and fragile and dangerous. This was family, or close enough to cut just as deep when it ended. Why do you keep the boots, Ravka? The question came out before he could stop it, and Ravka's head snapped up, her amber eyes wide. What? The boots? My old boots. I need to know why you keep them. I told you, you told me they are good boots. You told me they are mine, but that is not an answer. Yoren set his cup down and leaned forward, his voice low and insistent. What do they mean to you? Ravka's hands tightened on her cup. Why does it matter? Because I am tired of not understanding. Because my son asked a question I could not answer. Because every time I look at them, I feel like I am missing something important. He paused, then added more softly, because I need to know if I am imagining things or if you feel this too. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Ravka stared at him, and he watched emotions flicker across her face too quickly to name. Fear, hope, resignation, longing, feel what? She finally whispered, this, us, whatever this is. Ravka set her cup down with shaking hands. You do not know what you are asking. Then tell me. I am an orc, Yoren. You are human. Whatever I feel, it does not matter. It cannot matter. Why not? Because the world does not allow it. The words burst out of her with surprising force, and she stood abruptly, pacing to the window to stare out into the darkness. Because people like me do not get people like you. Because even if you wanted this, even if I dared to hope, it would not last. Someone would say something. Someone would make you choose, and I would lose you and Tobias both, and I do not know if I could survive that. Yoren stood and crossed to her, stopping just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. What do the boots mean, Ravka? She kept her back to him, her shoulders rigid. In my people's ways, when a woman tends a man's boots, it means she intends to walk beside him. It is a promise, a vow. Her voice dropped to barely audible. It means she has chosen him, even if he does not choose her back. The words hit Yoren like a fist to the sternum. He stood there trying to breathe, trying to process what she had just told him. She had been proposing. For months. Every time she cleaned those boots, every time she oiled the leather and mended the seams, she had been telling him in her language that she wanted him. And he had been too blind to see it. How long? His voice came out hoarse. How long what? How long have you been tending them? Since June. Ravka's reflection in the dark window showed her closing her eyes. Since the day you carried Tobias home on your shoulders after he twisted his ankle, and you sang to him even though you cannot carry a tune, and you let him fall asleep against your chest while you finished the evening chores with him draped over you like a sack of grain. I looked at you and thought, that is a man worth walking beside, and I have been too much of a coward to tell you with words. Yoren reached out and turned her to face him, his rough hands gentle on her shoulders. She looked up at him with those amber eyes full of barely contained emotion, and he saw himself reflected there, weathered and worn and terrified. "I am not good at this," he said. "I loved my wife and I buried her, and I did not think I would ever feel anything again. I am not soft. I am not romantic. I am a sheep farmer who can barely keep this place running, and I have a son who needs more than I know how to give." "I know," Ravka whispered, "but you make the house feel warm. You make Tobias laugh. You work beside me like we are partners, not employer and employee." His hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "And every time I see those boots, I feel like I am standing at the edge of something, and I do not know if I am brave enough to jump." "Then do not." Ravka's voice was steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "I will not push you. I will keep tending the boots, and I will keep caring for Tobias, and I will be here as long as you let me. You do not have to feel anything back. You do not have to jump." "What if I want to?" The question hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Ravka searched his face, and Yoren watched her trying to decide if he meant it. "Then jump," she said finally. "But be sure. Because I will catch you and I will not let go, and if you change your mind later, it will break me." Yoren thought about that. Thought about the risk and the fear and all the ways this could go wrong. Thought about what the neighbors would say, about the looks they would get in the village, about the prejudice Ravka had faced her whole life that would only get worse if she tied herself to him. Then he thought about the way she smiled at his son, the way she had made this house feel like a home again, the way his chest felt lighter when she was nearby, like he could finally breathe after 2 years of suffocating. "I am sure," he said, and kissed her. Ravka made a small sound of surprise against his mouth, and then she was kissing him back with a fierceness that made his head spin. Her hands came up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, and Yoren wrapped his arms around her and held on like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. She tasted like apple cider and hope, and when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Yoren rested his forehead against hers and felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 2 years finally thaw. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as help, not as an employee. I want you to stay because this is your home. Because you are," he struggled for the words and settled on the truth. "Because I need you. Because we need you. Because I am falling for you and it terrifies me, but not as much as the thought of you leaving." Ravka's tears spilled over, tracking down her green cheeks, and she let out a shaky laugh. "You are supposed to be stoic and manly and terrible at feelings." "I am terrible at feelings. This is terrible." But he was smiling when he said it, and when she laughed again, he kissed her forehead and then her cheek and then her mouth again, slower this time, savoring it. They stood there in the kitchen holding each other while the fire burned low, and when they finally separated, Ravka wiped her eyes and looked at him with an expression caught between joy and disbelief. "What do we do now?" she asked. Yoren considered that. "I suppose we figure it out as we go. I am not good at grand gestures, but I can promise you this." He took her hands in his, feeling how small they seemed despite her strength. "Before winter sets in hard, I want to give you my name, properly, the way it should be done, if you will have it." Ravka's eyes went wide. "You mean?" "I mean I want you to be my wife. I want Tobias to be your son, properly. I want us to be a family instead of pretending we are not already halfway there." He squeezed her hands. "I know it will not be easy, I know people will talk, but I am done pretending I do not care about you. I am done watching you tend my boots and not understanding what you are offering. So yes, Ravka Hethron, I am asking you to marry me." Ravka stared at him for a long moment, and then she pulled him down into another kiss, this one fierce and claiming and full of the answer she could not seem to put into words. When she pulled back, she was crying again, but smiling so wide it showed her tusks. "Yes," she said. Yes, you stubborn, impossible man. Yes. Yoren felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like rightness. He pulled her close again and held her while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. And for the first time since Sarah died, he felt like he might actually be allowed to be happy again. The next morning dawned cold and clear, and Yoren woke before sunrise as he always did. He dressed quietly and went out to check the sheep, and when he came back to the house an hour later, he found Ravka already up and making breakfast while Tobias sat at the table working on the letters she had been teaching him. "Morning," Yoren said, and Ravka looked up with a smile that made his heart skip. "Morning." She set a plate of eggs and bread in front of him, and her hand lingered on his shoulder for just a moment before she returned to the stove. Tobias looked between them with the uncanny perception of children. "You both look happy." "Do we?" Yoren asked, fighting a smile. "Yes. Did something good happen?" Yoren glanced at Ravka, who was watching them with barely contained amusement. "You could say that." "We need to talk to you about something." Tobias set down his slate, his expression suddenly wary. "Am I in trouble?" "No, nothing like that." Yoren pulled his chair closer to his son's. "Ravka and I have been talking and we have decided something important." "What?" Yoren took a breath and chose his words carefully. "You asked the other day why Ravka keeps my old boots. Do you remember?" Tobias nodded, looking between them with growing curiosity. "She keeps them because in her people's ways it means something special. It means she wants to be part of our family, not just as someone who works here but as someone who belongs here, the way your mother belonged here." Yoren saw Tobias's eyes widen and pressed on. "I want that too, so I asked Ravka if she would marry me and she said yes." Tobias stared at him, processing this. Then he looked at Ravka, who had come to stand beside Yoren with her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "You are going to be my mother?" Tobias asked her. Ravka crouched down so she was at eye level with him. "I would like to be, if that is all right with you. I know I cannot replace your first mother, I would never try. But I love you very much and I love your father and I would be honored to be your family, properly." Tobias looked at her for a long moment, his small face serious. Then he asked, "Will you still teach me songs? Every day if you want, and help me with Wooly, of course, and make honeycakes on my birthday, absolutely." Tobias nodded slowly. Then, to Yoren's surprise, he launched himself at Ravka and wrapped his arms around her neck. "Okay. You can be my mother." Ravka caught him and held him tight, her eyes closing as tears slipped down her cheeks. Yoren watched them and felt his throat tighten with emotion he did not have words for. His son and the woman he loved, holding each other like they had always been meant to fit together. When Tobias finally pulled back, he looked at his father with a grin. "Does this mean I can call her mother now, if she wants you to?" Yoren said. Tobias turned back to Ravka. "Can I? I would like that very much," Ravka said, her voice thick with emotion. "Good." Tobias hopped down from her arms and returned to his breakfast with the easy adaptability of childhood. "When is the wedding?" "Soon," Yoren said. "Before the hard snows come. Can Wooly be there? We will see." Tobias seemed satisfied with that and returned to his letters, humming one of the orcish songs Ravka had taught him. Yoren caught Ravka's eye across the table and saw his own wonder reflected there. This was happening. This was real. They were going to be a family. The next week was a flurry of activity. Yoren went to the village to speak with the magistrate about the marriage, and if the older man had reservations about a human marrying an orc, he kept them to himself. The paperwork was simple enough, the fee manageable, and Yoren left with a date set for the following Saturday. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small communities. Some of the neighbors offered quiet congratulations. Others looked at Yoren like he had lost his mind. A few stopped speaking to him altogether. Yoren had expected this and found he did not care as much as he thought he would. Let them talk. Let them judge. He was tired of living his life according to other people's expectations. Marcus Thorne, his nearest neighbor and the man he occasionally helped with harvests, stopped by the farm 3 days before the wedding. Yoren was mending a fence when Marcus rode up on his old bay gelding, and one look at the man's face told Yoren this was not a friendly visit. "Marcus," Yoren said, straightening and wiping his hands on his trousers. "Yoren." Marcus dismounted and tied his horse to the fence rail. "I heard you are marrying the orc woman." "Ravka, her name is Ravka." "Right, Ravka." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to talk to you about that." Yoren waited, his expression neutral. "Look, I know it is not my business," Marcus continued, "but people are talking. They are saying you are making a mistake, that this is wrong. Let them talk. But you have to think about Tobias, about what this means for him. Kids can be cruel, and my son is happier than he has been in 2 years. Yoren interrupted, his voice hard. "He laughs again. He sleeps through the night. He has someone who loves him and takes care of him. If people have a problem with that, they can take it up with me." Marcus held up his hands. "I am not trying to cause trouble. I just thought someone should say something. Make sure you have really thought this through." "I have. You loved Sarah." "I did. I still do." Yoren's jaw tightened. "But Sarah is gone, and I am still here, and I am allowed to be happy again. I am allowed to love again. And if that makes people uncomfortable, that is their problem, not mine." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, if you are sure." "I am." "Then I wish you well, truly." Marcus untied his horse and swung back into the saddle. "For what it is worth, I have always thought Ravka seemed like a good sort. She helped my wife with the harvest apples last fall and did not take a single coin for it. That speaks to character." Yoren felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Thank you." Marcus nodded and rode off, and Yoren returned to his fence with a lighter heart. Let the village think what they wanted. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it. The night before the wedding, Yoren could not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Sarah. About how much he had loved her, how destroyed he had been when she died. About how guilty he felt for moving on, even though he knew intellectually that she would have wanted him to be happy. Finally he got up and went to the small chest where he kept the few things of hers he had not been able to part with. A shawl. A ribbon. The wedding ring he had given her. He picked up the ring and turned it over in his fingers, feeling the smooth gold warm against his skin. "I miss you," he said quietly to the empty room. "I will always miss you, but I cannot keep living like I died too. Tobias needs more. I need more. And Ravka," he paused, searching for the right words. "Ravka is good. She makes me feel alive again. I hope you would understand." The room stayed silent, but Yoren felt something ease in his chest. He put the ring back in the chest and closed it gently, then returned to bed and finally slept. The wedding was held in the magistrate's office with only a handful of people present. Tobias stood beside Yoren in his best clothes, his hair combed neatly for once. Marcus and his wife came to serve as witnesses. The magistrate's clerk stood in the corner with the official book, ready to record the union. Ravka wore a simple dress of deep blue wool that she had sewn herself, and her black braid was woven through with a ribbon. She looked beautiful and terrified all at once, and when Yoren took her hands, he felt them trembling. "It is all right," he murmured. "I am here. I know." She smiled up at him, and some of the fear faded from her eyes. The ceremony was brief and practical, the words straightforward. Yoren spoke his vows in a voice that was steady despite the emotion churning in his chest, promising to care for Ravka in sickness and health, to stand by her in good times and bad, to share his life and his home and his name. When it was Ravka's turn, she spoke her vows in the Orcish tongue first, her voice low and musical, and then repeated them in the common language for the magistrate's benefit. She promised to walk beside him, to tend his household and his heart, to raise his son as her own, to be his partner in all things until death parted them. The magistrate pronounced them married, and Yoren kissed his wife for the first time in front of witnesses. Ravka clung to him for a moment, and he heard her whisper against his mouth, "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me." "I will choose you every day," he said, and meant it. They walked out of the magistrate's office as Yoren and Yoren Oakes, and Tobias held both their hands and chattered excitedly about the small celebration dinner Ravka had prepared back at the farm. The cold air bit at Yoren's cheeks, but he barely felt it. He felt warm from the inside out, anchored by the woman at his side and the boy between them. When they reached the farm, Ravka went inside to check on the roast she had left slow cooking, and Yoren took a moment to stand in the yard and look at the house. Smoke curled from the chimney. Light glowed in the windows. The sheep grazed peacefully in the lower pasture, and the first fat snowflakes of the season were starting to fall. This was his home. His family. His life. It was not the life he had planned. It was not the life he had imagined when he married Sarah all those years ago. But it was good, and it was his, and he was going to protect it with everything he had. Tobias came running back out of the house. "Mother says dinner is almost ready." Yoren smiled at the easy way his son used the title, at the joy in his voice. "Then we better get inside before we freeze." They went into the warmth together, and when Yoren closed the door behind them, he looked at the bench in the boot room. The old boots still sat there, clean and oiled and waiting. But now they meant something different. Now they were not a question or a promise held in silence. Now they were a vow kept. Dinner was roast mutton with root vegetables, and the honeycakes Ravka had promised Tobias, and they ate until they were stuffed. Afterward, Tobias helped clear the table, and then Ravka sent him to get ready for bed while she and Yoren cleaned up the kitchen together in comfortable silence. "Nervous?" Yoren asked as he dried the dishes she washed. "About what? Tonight, being married, all of it?" Ravka glanced at him with a small smile. "A little are you, more than a little," he admitted. "I have not done this in a long time. I might be terrible at it." "I doubt that." She handed him another plate. "You are good at the things that matter." "Like what?" "Like showing up, like working hard, like loving your son." She paused, then added softly, "Like giving people second chances when they need them." Yoren set down the dish towel and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I am glad you came here. I am glad you stayed. So am I." Ravka leaned back against him, her hands covering his where they rested on her stomach. "I have moved around so much, always looking for a place that felt right. I did not realize what I was looking for until I found it." "And what is that?" "Home." She turned in his arms to face him. "You and Tobias, this farm, this life, this is home." Yoren kissed her, slow and deep, and felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. This was home. They were home. Together, when they finally went to bed that night, Yoren lay beside his wife in the darkness and listened to the wind howl outside. The first real snow of winter was coming, he could feel it. But the house was warm and the animals were safe, and his family was under one roof. He reached out and found Ravka's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Thank you for the boots," he said quietly. He felt her smile in the darkness. "Thank you for understanding what they meant, eventually. Eventually counts." They fell asleep like that, hands intertwined, and Yoren dreamed of spring. Winter came hard and fast, as it always did in the hill country. Snow piled high against the barn doors, and the wind cut like knives across the exposed fields. Yoren spent his days checking on the sheep, breaking ice in the water troughs, hauling feed from the barn to the sheltered pastures. Ravka kept the house running, kept the fires burning, kept Tobias entertained and educated during the long weeks when going outside meant risking frostbite. They fell into a rhythm as husband and wife that felt both new and startlingly natural. Ravka still woke before dawn to start breakfast, but now Yoren woke with her, and they worked in the kitchen together, hips bumping companionably as they moved around each other. She still mended his clothes, but now she did it sitting beside him on the small sofa by the fire, her shoulder pressed against his. She still tended the boots, but now she did it openly, with pride, and sometimes Yoren would catch her smiling at them like they held a secret only she knew. Tobias adjusted to calling Ravka mother with the easy acceptance of childhood. He still remembered Sarah, still sometimes talked about her, and Ravka never tried to replace those memories. Instead, she listened and nodded and told Tobias that his first mother must have been a wonderful woman to raise such a good boy. It was exactly the right thing to say, and Yoren loved her more for it. December passed into January, and the cold deepened. One particularly brutal night when the temperature dropped so low that the water bucket inside the house developed a skin of ice, they all piled into Yoren and Ravka's bed together, Tobias wedged between them for warmth. The boy fell asleep almost immediately, and Yoren lay there listening to his son's soft breathing and feeling Ravka's hand find his across the small body between them. "You think we will survive this winter?" she asked quietly. "We have before. This is different. The snow is heavier. The cold is worse. The feed is going faster than I calculated." She paused. "I am worried about the sheep." Yoren was worried too, though he had not said it aloud. They had already lost 3 ewes to the cold, and several more were looking thin despite the feed he was giving them. The farm could survive losing a few animals, but not many. Not if they wanted to make it through to spring with enough of a flock to rebuild. "We will manage," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We always do." "Together," Ravka said, and it was not a question. "Together," he agreed. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold, and Yoren went out to check the sheep with his dogs at his heels and Ravka's warnings to be careful ringing in his ears. He found the flock huddled in the shelter he had built against the barn's south wall, steam rising from their wool in the frigid air. He counted heads and felt his heart sink. 2 more were missing. He found them an hour later in a far corner of the field, half buried in a snowdrift. Dead. Frozen solid despite their thick wool. Yoren stood there looking at them and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle on his shoulders. This was the reality of farming. This was what it meant to raise livestock in country where winter could kill without warning. He had known it his whole life, but it never got easier. He dragged the carcasses back to the barn and spent an hour butchering what meat could be saved. Waste nothing. That was the rule. These sheep had died, but their meat would feed his family, and their hides could be tanned, and their bones would go into soup stock. Nothing wasted. When he finally came back to the house, hands numb and face raw from the cold, Ravka took one look at him and pulled him inside without a word. She sat him by the fire and brought him hot tea and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and when he told her about the sheep, she just nodded and held his cold hands between her warm ones until feeling returned. "We will be all right," she said. "How do you know?" "Because we have each other. Because we are both stubborn and too mean to quit." She smiled slightly. "Because I have been keeping a close watch on our stores, and we have more than you think. I have been careful." Yoren looked at her and felt some of the weight lift. "What would I do without you? Let us not find out." February came, and with it a brief thaw that turned the snow to slush and made everything muddy and miserable. Then the temperature dropped again and froze everything solid, making the footing treacherous. Yoren slipped on the ice while carrying a bucket of feed and came down hard on his shoulder. He tried to play it off as nothing, but by that evening the pain was bad enough that he could barely lift his arm. Ravka made him sit still while she examined the injury with careful fingers. "It is not broken, but you have wrenched it badly. You need to rest it." "Cannot rest. Too much work." "Then I will do the work." She fixed him with a look that brooked no argument. "You will stay inside and watch Tobias and let your shoulder heal, or you will do permanent damage and be useless for the rest of the season. Choose." Yoren wanted to argue, but the pain in his shoulder was bad enough that he knew she was right. "You cannot manage the sheep alone. Watch me." And she did. For the next week, Ravka took over the outside work while Yoren stayed in the house and did what he could with one arm. She checked the sheep twice a day, hauled feed and water, broke ice in the troughs, and came back each time red-cheeked and exhausted but refusing to complain. Tobias helped where he could, and Yoren supervised from the doorway, frustrated by his uselessness but grudgingly impressed by his wife's competence. She was stronger than she looked, more capable, more determined. She attacked the work with the same steady relentlessness she brought to everything else. And by the time Yoren's shoulder healed enough to take back the outside chores, he had a new appreciation for just how much she had been doing all along. "Thank you," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, his arm still in a sling but healing well. "For what?" "For keeping everything going while I was broken." Ravka looked at him with amusement. "You were not broken, you were injured. There is a difference. It felt broken." "That is because you are terrible at being still." She poked his good shoulder gently. "You need to learn that accepting help is not weakness." "I know." "Do you? Because you spent the first 6 months I was here acting like asking for help would kill you." Yoren grimaced because she was right. "I am getting better at it." "You are." She leaned against him carefully, mindful of his injury. "We are getting better at it. Together." "Together," he agreed and kissed the top of her head. March arrived with the promise of spring still weeks away, but the worst of the winter behind them. The days grew incrementally longer. The sun had a little more warmth in it. The sheep that had survived the winter started to show signs of pregnancy, their bellies rounding with the next generation. Yoren did the count and felt cautious relief. They had lost animals, but not so many that they could not recover. The flock would be smaller this year, the profit thinner, but they would make it. They would survive to see another season. One evening as they sat at dinner, Tobias announced that Wooly had grown so much he barely fit in the barn anymore. "He is going to be a big ram," Ravka agreed. "The biggest we have ever raised. Can we keep him?" Tobias asked. Even after he is grown, Yoren and Ravka exchanged glances. Normally, a ram would be sold or butchered once it reached full size, but Wooly had become more pet than livestock. "We will see," Yoren said, which was parent language for probably yes if you keep being good. Tobias grinned like he understood exactly what that meant and went back to his dinner with renewed enthusiasm. That night after Tobias was asleep, Yoren found Ravka standing in the boot room staring at the old boots on the bench. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I did not know if you would ever understand what they meant, that I was prepared to tend them for years without you ever knowing, that I am so glad I was wrong." She leaned back against him. "That I am happy, good." Yoren tightened his arms around her. "I want you to be happy. I am, truly." She turned in his embrace to face him. "This is everything I wanted and did not know how to ask for. You did ask, in your own way. And you answered. Eventually." She was smiling as she said it, teasing. "Better late than never. Much better." She kissed him, soft and sweet, and Yoren felt the rightness of it settle into his bones all over again. They were going to be all right. The farm would survive. The family would survive. They had made it through the worst winter either of them could remember, and they had done it together. That was worth more than any easy season. April brought lambing season, and for 3 weeks the farm was chaos. Ewes giving birth at all hours. Lambs needing to be checked and marked and made sure they were nursing. Nights spent in the barn checking on expectant mothers. Days spent moving between exhaustion and exhilaration as the flock's next generation arrived squirming and bleeding into the world. Ravka was invaluable during lambing. She had good instincts for when a ewe was in trouble, quick hands for helping with difficult births, patience for the bottle feeding of orphaned or rejected lambs. She and Yoren worked in shifts, trading off sleep so someone was always watching the flock. Tobias helped when he could, mostly by keeping the bottle-fed lambs entertained and making sure they did not wander off and get into trouble. By the end of April, they had 23 new lambs. Not a huge number, but respectable given the losses over winter. Yoren stood in the pasture watching the lambs play and felt something like pride. They had done this. They had made it through. Ravka came to stand beside him, her sleeve brushing his. Good crop this year. Thanks to you. Thanks to us. She glanced up at him. I have been thinking. About what? About next season. About expanding the flock. We could buy a few more breeding ewes in the fall if we have a good price at market, build up our numbers again. Yoren considered that. It would be a risk. Everything is a risk, but I think we could do it. Together. There was that word again. Together. It seemed to be the foundation of everything now, and Yoren found he liked it that way. All right, he said. We will look at the numbers, see what we can afford. Ravka smiled, and Yoren realized she had been nervous about suggesting it. She was still learning that this was her farm too, that her opinions mattered, that they were partners in truth and not just in name. What else have you been thinking about? He asked. She hesitated, then said, children. Yoren went very still. Our own. Yes. Ravka's voice was quiet, almost tentative. I know Tobias is mine now in every way that matters, but I have been wondering if you might want more, if we might want more together. Yoren turned to face her fully. Do you want that? I think so. If you do, if you think it is a good idea. She was watching him with those amber eyes full of hope and uncertainty. But I know it is complicated. A child who is half human and half orc. People will talk no matter what we do, Yoren interrupted. They are already talking. If we want a child, that is our business, not theirs. So you do want one, Yoren thought about it, about a baby in the house again, about the work and the exhaustion and the joy of it, about a child who would be part him and part Ravka, a physical manifestation of this thing between them. Yes, he said finally. I want that, if you do. Ravka's face lit up with a smile so bright it made his chest ache. Really, really. She threw her arms around him, and Yoren held her and thought about the future, about more children running around the farm, about growing old with this woman beside him, about all the things he had thought were lost to him 2 years ago when Sarah died. He was allowed to be happy. He was allowed to love again. He was allowed to want things, and he wanted this. May was planting season, and they worked from dawn to dusk getting the kitchen garden in and the fields prepped for hay. The work was hard but satisfying, and Tobias helped where he could, mostly by carrying water and pulling the occasional weed. He was getting tall, Yoren noticed, shooting up like a weed himself. Soon enough he would be big enough to do real work, and Yoren found himself looking forward to teaching his son the way his own father had taught him. One afternoon while they were working, a rider approached the farm. Yoren straightened from the row he was planting and shaded his eyes against the sun. The man was a stranger, well-dressed in traveling clothes that marked him as someone from the city. "Can I help you?" Yoren asked as the man dismounted. "I am looking for the Oakes farm. Is this it?" "It is." The man looked around with an expression that was hard to read. "I am Marcus Green from the land office in the capital. I am here about a tax matter." Yoren felt his stomach drop. "What kind of tax matter?" "Your property taxes are in arrears. According to our records, you are 3/4 behind in payment." "That cannot be right." Yoren wiped his hands on his trousers, mind racing. "I paid the year in full last September. I have no record of that payment." The man pulled a ledger from his saddlebag and flipped through it. "See here. Your name, no payment since 18 months ago." Yoren stared at the ledger, cold spreading through his chest. "There must be a mistake. I paid. I have the receipt somewhere." "Then I suggest you find it, because without proof of payment you owe the full amount plus penalties. If you cannot pay within 30 days, the land will be forfeit." "Forfeit?" Yoren felt the word like a punch. "You cannot take my farm." "I do not make the rules, Mr. Oakes. I just enforce them." The man closed his ledger. "Find your receipt or find the money. 30 days." He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Yoren standing in the half-planted field feeling like the ground had just dropped out from under him. Ravka came running from the garden, Tobias at her heels. "What was that about?" "Tax trouble." Yoren's voice came out hollow. "He says we owe 3/4 worth of back taxes plus penalties. Says if we cannot pay or prove we already did, they will take the farm." Ravka's face went pale. "But you paid. I was here. I remember you going to the village with the money." "I know I paid. But I have to find the receipt to prove it, and I do not remember where I put it." Yoren looked at the house, at the fields, at the life they had built. "If I cannot find it, if I cannot prove payment, we lose everything." The next week was a nightmare. Yoren tore the house apart looking for the tax receipt. He checked every drawer, every box, every possible place he might have stored it. Ravka helped, methodical and thorough, but the receipt did not turn up. Either it was lost, or he had never gotten one in the first place, and Yoren could not remember which. He rode to the village to speak with the tax collector there, an old man named Foster who had held the position for 30 years. Foster checked his records and frowned. "I do not have a record of your payment either, Yoren, but I remember you coming in. Late September, was it not, paid in coin?" "Yes, you counted it out right there on the counter." "I remember that, but I cannot find where I recorded it." Foster looked genuinely distressed. "I must have made a mistake, written it in the wrong ledger or under the wrong name. I am so sorry." "Can you tell them that? Tell them you remember the payment." "I can try, but without documentation, I do not know if they will accept my word." Foster spread his hands helplessly. "The land office does not trust us village collectors. They think we are all corrupt or incompetent." Yoren left the tax office feeling like he was drowning. Without proof, they would not believe him, and without belief, they would take the farm. The home he had built with Sarah. The home he was rebuilding with Ravka. The place where his son was growing up. All of it gone. He rode home slowly, trying to figure out what to do. He could try to raise the money. But 3/4 worth of taxes plus penalties was more than he had in savings, especially after buying feed to get through the winter. He could try to borrow it, but who would lend that much to a sheep farmer who might lose his land anyway? He could fight it in court, but that would take time and money he did not have. He could lose everything. When he got home, Ravka was waiting in the yard. She took one look at his face and came to help him dismount, her hand steady on his arm. No luck. "Foster remembers the payment but cannot find where he recorded it. Without that, we have nothing." Yoren stared at the house, his vision blurring. "I do not know what to do." Ravka was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, How much do we need? More than we have. Even if we sold half the flock, we would barely scratch the surface. What about my wages? I have been saving everything you paid me. I never spent it. Yoren looked at her in surprise. You have been here over a year. That still would not be enough. Then we combine it with what you have saved. We sell some animals. We take it all to the land office and we negotiate. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. We do not give up. We fight for this place, for our home. Ravka, no. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. This is our farm, our family, our life. I am not losing it without a fight, and neither are you. We are going to figure this out, together. That word again, together. Yoren felt something loosen in his chest, some of the panic receding. She was right. They would fight, they would find a way. They spent the next 2 days going over their finances. Ravka's savings, Yoren's savings, the value of the animals they could bear to part with. They added it up and came up short, but not by as much as Yoren had feared. We need another 100 silver, Ravka said, staring at the figures. Maybe less if we can negotiate down the penalties. Where do we get 100 silver? I do not know yet, but we will think of something. That night, Yoren lay awake staring at the ceiling while Ravka slept beside him. He thought about everything they had been through, the winter, the lambing, the slow building of a life together. The idea of losing it all made him feel physically ill. He must have made some sound because Ravka stirred and rolled toward him. Cannot sleep? No, me neither. She found his hand in the darkness. We will figure it out. What if we do not? Then we start over somewhere else. We take Tobias and we find another place and we build again. Her voice was steady, certain. I do not care where we are as long as we are together. Yoren pulled her close and held on like she was the only thing keeping him from drowning. I am sorry. This is my fault. I should have kept better records. I should have. Stop. Ravka pressed her fingers to his mouth. This is not your fault. Foster made a mistake. The land office is being unreasonable. None of that is on you. But you came here for a home, for permanence. I promised you that. And you have given it to me. Home is not a place, Yoren. It is people. It is you and Tobias. As long as I have that, I have everything I need. Yoren kissed her, desperate and grateful, and when they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and tried to believe her words. The next morning, Marcus Thorne rode up to the farm with his wife beside him. Yoren went out to meet them, wary of more bad news. Marcus, Clara, what brings you here? Marcus dismounted and helped his wife down. We heard about your trouble with the land office. Yoren felt his jaw tighten. News travels fast. It does in small villages. Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. We want to help. What? We took up a collection. Some of the neighbors, people who have known you for years, who know you are not a cheat or a liar. Marcus held out the pouch. It is not 100 silver, but it is close. 57 silver and change. Yoren stared at the pouch like it might bite him. I cannot accept that. You can and you will, Clara said firmly. You helped us with our harvest last year when Marcus threw his back out. You loaned the Giffords your plow when theirs broke. You have been a good neighbor for years, and we are not going to stand by and watch you lose your farm over a clerical error. But no buts. Marcus pressed the pouch into Yoren's hands. Take it. Pay back what you can when you can, and do not worry about the rest. That is what neighbors do. Yoren felt his throat close up. He looked at the pouch, then at Marcus and Clara, then at Ravka, who had come to stand beside him with tears streaming down her green cheeks. Thank you, he managed to say. I do not know how to repay this. Be happy, keep farming, raise that boy of yours to be a good man like his father. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. That is repayment enough. They stayed for tea, and by the time they left, Yoren felt like he could breathe again. With the collection added to their savings and the sale of some animals, They would have enough. Barely, but enough. 2 days later, Yoren and Ravka rode to the land office together with their proof of payment cobbled together from receipts and Foster's written testimony, and every scrap of documentation they could find. The clerk who met them was not green but an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She reviewed their materials in silence, then pulled out the original ledger and compared it to Foster's testimony. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up. "This is a mess," she said bluntly. "But I believe you. Green should have checked with the local collector before he came out here making threats." "So we are clear?" Yoren asked, hardly daring to hope. "You are clear. I will update the records and send you a written confirmation. You should receive it within a week." She stamped a form and handed it to him. "Keep this in the meantime. If anyone else comes asking, show them that." Yoren took the form with shaking hands. "Thank you. Do not thank me. Just keep better records in the future." They left the land office in a daze, and when they reached the street, Ravka let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around Yoren's neck. "We did it," she said. "We kept our home. We did." Yoren held her tight, not caring that people were staring at the human man embracing his orc wife in the middle of the street. "We kept our home." That night they celebrated with a special dinner, and Tobias asked why everyone seemed so happy. "Because we almost lost the farm, but we did not," Yoren said. "Because we have good neighbors. Because your mother is brilliant and fierce, and I am very lucky to have her." "I already knew that," Tobias said seriously, and Ravka laughed and ruffled his hair. Summer came in warm and bright, and the farm settled into the rhythm of growing things. The sheep grazed fat and happy in the pastures. The garden produced more than they could eat, and Ravka spent long days preserving and pickling and drying for the next winter. Tobias ran wild in the fields with Wooly at his heels, brown as a berry and grinning more often than not. In late July, Ravka came to Yoren in the barn where he was mending a stall door and said quietly, "I am pregnant." Yoren dropped the hammer. "What? I am pregnant." "About 2 months along, I think." She was smiling but looked nervous. "Are you happy?" Yoren crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," she laughed, the sound muffled against his chest. "Good. Because I am terrified and excited, and I needed you to be happy." "I am happy. I am thrilled. I am." He pulled back to look at her, this woman who had walked into his life and changed everything. "I am so lucky. We both are." They told Tobias that evening, and the boy's reaction was pure joy. "I am going to be a big brother." "You are," Ravka confirmed. "When? Probably late winter. February, maybe early March." Tobias did some mental math, then grinned. "So we will have a baby by next spring." "That is right. Can I help take care of it?" "Of course you can." "I will need all the help I can get." Ravka pulled him into a hug, and Yoren watched his son and his wife together and felt his heart swell with something too big for words. This was his family. This was his life. And it was good. The pregnancy progressed easily. Ravka continued working through the summer and into early fall, only slowing down when her belly started to round noticeably. Yoren tried to make her rest more, but she waved him off and kept going, stubborn as ever. "I am pregnant, not broken," she said for the 100th time when he tried to take a heavy basket from her. "I know, but I worry. Worry less. Work more." But she was smiling as she said it, and she let him carry the basket anyway. In October, Yoren made good on their plan to expand the flock. They bought 5 breeding ewes at market, good strong animals with solid bloodlines. The farm was growing, the family was growing, everything was moving in the right direction. One evening as they sat by the fire, Ravka asked, "Do you think about her, Sarah?" Yoren stiffened slightly. "Sometimes." "Why?" Because I want you to know it is all right if you do. She was your wife. She was Tobias's mother. She should be remembered." "She would have liked you," Yoren said after a moment. "She would have been glad that you were here, that Tobias had you." "Do you really think so?" "I do. She wanted us to be happy. She would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone and miserable." He took Ravka's hand. "She would have wanted this for all of us." Ravka leaned against his shoulder. "I hope so. I do not want to feel like I am replacing her." "You are not replacing her. You are just—" Yoren struggled for the right words. "You are adding to the story, making it bigger, better. Different but good." "I like that," Ravka said softly. Adding to the story. Winter came again, but this time Yoren faced it with confidence instead of dread. They had more stores than the previous year, more animals, more experience. The house was warm and the family was whole, and when the first snow fell in late November, Tobias ran outside to catch flakes on his tongue while Ravka laughed and Yoren watched from the doorway, feeling content. In early December, Yoren came home from checking the sheep to find Ravka folding tiny clothes and setting them in the dresser they had pulled out of storage. Baby clothes, worn by Tobias years ago and saved for some future that Sarah had hoped for but never lived to see. "Those fit him once," Yoren said, touching a small shirt. "They will fit our daughter too." Ravka smiled at him, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I can feel her moving now. She is going to be a fighter, like her mother, like both of us." Ravka folded another shirt, her movements careful and precise. "I have been thinking about names." "What did you have in mind?" "Something simple, something strong." She paused. "What about Mara?" Yoren tested the name on his tongue. "Mara Oakes, I like it. So do I." Mara was born on a brutally cold night in late February, when the wind howled like a living thing, and the snow piled against the windows. The midwife from the village came and stayed, and Yoren paced the kitchen while Tobias slept oblivious in his bed, and Ravka labored in the next room. It seemed to take forever. Yoren had been through this before with Sarah, had paced these same floorboards waiting for Tobias to arrive, but that did not make it easier. Every sound from the bedroom made his heart race. Every hour that passed wounded his nerves tighter. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a thin wail, a baby crying. He stopped pacing and stared at the closed door, hardly daring to breathe. The midwife emerged a few minutes later with a tired smile. "You have a daughter, Mr. Oakes. Both mother and baby are well." Yoren sagged with relief. "Can I see them?" "Give us a few more minutes to get them settled." Those few minutes felt like years, but finally the midwife opened the door and beckoned him in. Yoren entered the bedroom to find Ravka propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted and radiant all at once, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your daughter," Ravka said softly. Yoren crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby. She was tiny, her skin a pale green like new leaves in spring, her eyes squeezed shut. A few wisps of black hair clung to her head, and when Ravka pulled back the blanket slightly, Yoren saw the small tusks just beginning to show on her lower jaw. She was perfect. "Hello, Mara," he whispered, and the baby's eyes opened slightly, dark and unfocused. "I am your father." "Do you want to hold her?" Ravka asked. Yoren nodded, not trusting his voice, and Ravka transferred the baby carefully into his arms. Mara was so light, so fragile, and Yoren cradled her like she was made of glass. He had forgotten how small newborns were, how vulnerable, how much love you could feel for someone you had just met. "She is beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She is ours," Ravka said, and Yoren heard the wonder in her voice. "We made her, we did." Yoren sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to look away from his daughter's face. "She is going to be something, this one. She already is." They sat like that until Tobias woke up and came running in to meet his new sister. The boy climbed onto the bed carefully and peered at the baby with wide eyes. "She is so small," he whispered. "You were this small once," Yoren told him. "Really, really." Tobias reached out and touched Mara's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his. "She is holding me, she is," Ravka said with a smile. "She already knows her big brother." Tobias beamed with pride, and Yoren felt his heart might burst from the fullness of it all. His son, his wife, his daughter, his family, complete and whole and more than he had ever thought he deserved. Spring came, and with it the usual chaos of lambing and planting. But now there was also a baby in the house, and the rhythm of their days changed to accommodate her. Ravka strapped Mara to her chest in a sling while she worked, and the baby seemed content to sleep or watch the world go by from her mother's arms. Tobias was a devoted big brother, always eager to help with Mara. He fetched clean cloths when she needed changing, sang to her when she fussed, and told her elaborate stories about the farm and the sheep and his lamb Wooly, who was now a massive ram with a proud set of curved horns. Yoren watched his family grow and thrive and felt grateful for every single day. The work was still hard. The winters were still brutal. The farm was still a constant struggle against weather and economics and the simple difficulty of making a living from the land. But he was not alone anymore. He had Ravka, fierce and capable and full of love. He had Tobias, growing tall and confident. He had Mara, bright-eyed and curious even at 3 months old. He had a family, and that made everything worthwhile. One evening in late spring, Yoren found Ravka in the boot room. She was holding his old boots, the ones she had tended for so long, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were soft with memory. "You remember when Tobias asked about these?" she said. "I do. That was the beginning of everything, was it not?" "It was." She set the boots back on the bench carefully. "I thought you would never understand. I thought I would tend these forever without you ever knowing what I was saying. I am glad I figured it out, eventually." "Me too." Ravka came to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you for giving me your name before winter, for choosing me, for letting me be part of this." Yoren held her close and looked around at the house they had built together, the home they had made, the life they had created from grief and hope and stubborn determination. "I would choose you every time," he said. "In every lifetime, in every season, I would choose you. Even though I am an orc, because you are you. Everything else is just details." Ravka laughed, warm and bright, and tilted her head up to kiss him. When they broke apart, Yoren heard Mara fussing in the other room and Tobias's young voice trying to soothe her with an off-key lullaby. "We should go help him," Ravka said. "We should." But Yoren did not move yet, taking one more moment to stand in the boot room with his wife in his arms, looking at the boots that had started everything. They were just boots. Old leather and worn soles and careful stitching, but they had become a promise, a vow. A symbol of two people choosing to walk beside each other, no matter what the world threw at them. And every morning when Yoren pulled on his work boots and headed out to the fields, he remembered that promise. Remembered what it meant to be chosen, to be loved. To have someone who would tend your boots and your heart with equal care. He had been lost after Sarah died, drowning in grief and responsibility, and the simple impossibility of doing it all alone. Then Ravka had walked up the path to his farm with nothing but determination and hope, and she had quietly, steadily, built a new life with him piece by piece. She had saved him without him even realizing he needed saving. Now it was his turn to save her right back, every single day, by choosing her. By standing beside her against a world that did not understand. by building a family and a home and a life that said louder than words that they belonged together. The boots sat on their bench, clean and oiled and waiting, a reminder of everything they had been through and everything still to come. Seasons would pass, children would grow, the farm would endure. And through it all, Yoren and Ravka would walk side by side, their paths merged into one, their boots carrying them forward together into whatever came next. That was what marriage meant, what family meant. Not the grand gestures or the perfect moments, but the steady, daily choice to keep walking together, to tend each other's boots and hearts, to build something that would last. In the other room, Tobias finally got Mara to stop fussing, and his triumphant laugh rang out clear and bright. Ravka smiled and took Yoren's hand, and together they went to join their children. The boots could wait. The work could wait. Right now, in this moment, all that mattered was family, and that was everything.